So, of course, things have been a little interesting for you. I know you've talked to Steve, our interim news director, so I won't get
Hmm.
too much into it, but how have
No
things
problem.
been since then, since you decided to run as independent? How have
Oh,
things been?
it's been amazing. The term that I came up with was almost liberating
Mm-hmm.
in a way because over the last couple of years, actually last couple of elections, I feel people have always voted the person over the party. I found when I was out door knocking and talking to people in the community, we like you, Mike. You've always fought for us. Don't know if I like the party, or don't know if I like your leader. Uh, Running as an independent the way it is now, it's actually been really exciting because I've already been out on the door knocking, and a lot of people are just saying, "Great, always supported you anyway, always voted for you," uh, and I'm hoping that continues.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say the response has been amazing. Some people have a lot of sympathy because they say, "This is why I hate party politics. Look what just happened to you,"
Mm-hmm.
and a good majority of the people are saying, nothing's changed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad to hear you're running, and hopefully you'll be successful on election day.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And what's kind of motivated you to stay? I know you're an
Yeah.
incumbent. What was the main motivating factor to be an independent, to choose, my party doesn't exist anymore, whatever happens
Hmm.
there, I'm still going to run?
Well, I think the big thing for me is I got into politics fighting for my region. So just because on the ballot it'll just say Mike Bernier now, it won't have a party name next to it. It doesn't change anything for me
Mm-hmm.
in the sense of what I've always wanted to do. In fact, I think it's going to be better because in party politics, there's a lot of give and take. Sometimes there's things you want to say that you're asked not to
Mm-hmm.
because it might affect other candidates in other parts of the province. Now I don't have to worry about that at all.
Yeah.
Now I can just 100%, what does my riding want? What do I have to say? How hard do I have to work to get our issues addressed in Victoria? So it's actually, in a lot of ways, it's going to be better because I won't be hamstrung
Mm-hmm.
by a party trying to control our message.
Mm-hmm. You're a solo unit rather than having to play as a member of the team, as it were.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I was always loyal.
Mm-hmm.
I was always one of those people. I always used the sports analogy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you go in on a team, you work hard as a team, you try to win as a team. I've always been that way. I've using the same sports analogy though. You don't in the third period of a hockey game when the other team's winning, you don't take off your jersey and put on the other team's jersey hoping it's an easy win.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been in favor of that, and that's kind of what we're seeing playing out right now.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes complete sense. And of course, this is a kind of a different situation because your
Mm-hmm.
team decided not to play in the tournament anymore.
That's
So,
exactly right.
yeah.
Yeah, it's contrary to what some people are saying. What Kevin Falcon and what we did was we wanted to ensure that we weren't splitting the vote and allowing an easy victory for the NDP. That's been paramount since day one on our election campaign. What do we have to do to get the NDP out of government, especially in a region like this? We've seen the impacts, how they've hurt us up here. So nothing's changed on that at all. The difference is you're going to see some ridings around the province, like here, probably in the North Peace with Dan. There's one down in the Okanagan, where the NDP have never won, never will win. And so it's allowing some of us as independents to come in and just truly represent the people. There's no chance of a vote split in regions like this. So people get the choice.
Yeah.
Do they want somebody with experience or somebody who's never done the job before? That's what'll happen.
Yeah, they can vote for people rather than for political parties, as it were.
Exactly.
Okay. And kind of on that note, one of our readers asked, how do you plan to reform the healthcare system specifically so that all northeastern BC residents get equal access to care?
Yeah, and that's probably one of the best questions and one that we've been faced with for quite a while, and probably front and center right now when we've seen the hospital diversions, we've seen the doctors who have left and not enough coming in. There's a lot of options actually that we can address and look at. I mean, first of all, there's a lot of opportunities locally with Northern Lights College. We can train people locally. We need to start promoting a lot of our own youth as they're graduating high school. Please get into the healthcare field. You can be trained right here. It's a career for life. We also have a lot of foreign trained people that we found out about. For instance, in Dawson Creek alone, we have 28 people that came and met with me who are registered nurses or doctors even from the Philippines, but their credentials are not being recognized in BC, so they're working in Tim Hortons or somewhere. We can definitely look at a different way of assisting them so they can bring their skills and their passion for healthcare into our system. But we just need to change those rules. I think another one too is the pay model for our doctors needs to be addressed, because right now we've lost that rural advantage. A doctor used to get paid maybe $100,000 more, we'll say, to work in a rural or remote community compared to Chilliwack.
Yeah.
The new pay model that the NDP have come up with has taken that advantage away, especially if a doctor up here sees anybody from Alberta. It changes what they're allowed to apply for. And of course, most of our doctors do because of where we live. So that policy needs to be changed as well. We need that rural advantage to be able to not only recruit, but retain our healthcare professionals. So that's just a few anyway.
Yeah, and certainly if you recruit someone who has lived in the north all their life, who is from either Fort St. John or Dawson Creek or Prince George, there's more of an incentive. Their life is here rather than trying to get someone who just graduated from Victoria to incentivize them to come up here and then stay here. It's two completely different ballgames.
Absolutely. And another perfect example to that is we have the Northern Medical Program Trust that was created working with University of Northern British Columbia out of Prince George. And of course, they've got their sub-campuses. I looked into this when we were funding that, and we, being the Peace Region, helped fund that trust to have that programming. I found out that it's not being used exclusively for Northern students, that there's a whole bunch of students that are coming up from the Lower Mainland, other parts of British Columbia to UNBC. And so what's happening is we could have somebody out of Fort St. John or Dawson Creek that wants to become a doctor. They can apply and they can get overlooked because somebody from Surrey is coming up and taking that spot. To me, that has to change as well, because the whole concept is train local, keep local, to what you said.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we need to really be pushing back on. There should only be spaces available for others outside of the north if nobody else has applied for those spaces. So that's yet another. There's so many things we can do that are not being looked at.
That makes perfect sense. And you kind of have already answered this one with your last couple questions.
It's because I love to talk about this. I'm passionate about this.
I mean, it's moving up here even from the Maritimes, I never thought I'd be in a province that talked about healthcare more than Nova Scotia, but I found one.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I'll say about this, where my frustration on the healthcare system right now. In 2016, the healthcare budget in the province of British Columbia was in the vicinity of around $15.5 billion. We're now spending over $30 billion. So in the last 7 years under the NDP, we've doubled the amount of money we're spending on healthcare, yet our services, our access to specialists in the north to come up, the wait lists, everything's worse. I can't point to anything that's gotten better in the last 7 years in healthcare, and we've doubled the amount of money. So the bureaucracy, the spending on just administration, there's so many things that needs to be tackled, because to me, it's a lot of waste of not putting it in the front line where it needs to be, which is the services for the people in our community when they need it.
And kind of in a segue, I mean, one perfect example of this kind of question would be with Canfor, but how will you continue investing in natural resources while at the same time continuing the line of respecting Indigenous culture and their rights?
Yeah, I think this is a really important concept right now and discussion that we have to have, because the way we are in society right now, of course, and the Supreme Court of Canada has ruled on the different rights that First Nations have. So we need to accommodate that, but we need to have everybody at the table, in my opinion. I look at what happened in the caribou issue in the South Peace around Chetwynd in that area about, time flies, but it was probably 4 or 5 years ago now when it started, where all of the discussion was with local First Nations, because government said we have a right to discuss and accommodate with them as a government to government, but nobody else was consulted at all. And so my argument there is, the analogy I'll use is the Supreme Court of Canada has ruled that First Nations deserve a seat at the table. Nowhere in those documents that I've seen does it say that everybody else's chairs are removed. The point being, I think if we are going to be successful as a region, we need to be all working together. We need to be talking together. It should not be a divide. It should not be one group or another group. I think we can all win or lose together. And we have such an immense amount of opportunity when it comes to our resource development up here, whether it's mining, oil and gas, our forestry. I'd even throw agriculture in there because I've been talking with a lot of ranchers and people who are struggling right now with access to Crown land. Mm-hmm. We can't sit around and just wait for permits. We can't sit around and wait for somebody else to have those discussions. Mm-hmm. I think we need to be all at the table, especially the people that use the land, and we need to be talking collectively to fix these problems. Mm-hmm. I think it can be done. I think if everybody's rational, if everybody's at the table, we can get through this, but it has to be done soon because we're losing as mills are closing, mm-hmm. mines could close or not open. Mm-hmm. It needs to be addressed right away.
Absolutely. And this kind of fits in a lot with how would that, what you've all said with everyone at the table and having to act fast, how does that factor into climate change? We see it's getting a lot hotter, there's more wildfires, mm-hmm. wildfires are more aggressive. How does that kind of line of what you would do fit into climate change with natural resources?
Well, I think I always go back to the fact that British Columbia has the strictest environmental regulations probably in the globe. Mm-hmm. That's something that we've always prided ourselves on. So we as a jurisdiction or as a community or as a region have no impact collectively, like here on impacts to climate, but we can set the stage. We can have strong regulations, which we have. We can show people how it can be done. And I think that's really important. In fact, that's why I was one of the loudest proponents when it came to LNG. Mm-hmm. When you think of a place like China that is opening up a new coal-fired power plant, like one a week, LNG can stop all of those coal plants from opening. So we could actually have a huge impact on climate change in British Columbia by expanding our natural resource work that we're doing by helping other parts of the world. We have enough natural gas just in the Peace region, for instance, to supply gas for all of Canada for almost 100 years. It's not going anywhere. There's huge potential. Why wouldn't we be utilizing that to help the rest of the world? It would create the jobs here. It would create the revenue here for our families. And that actually goes to the province for building more schools and hospitals as well.
Mm-hmm. And you touched on revenue a little bit, but mm-hmm. What would you do to address housing affordability in the region?
Housing affordability is an interesting one because when you look at housing, we feel it here in a different way. I mean, obviously, if you have a place like Vancouver, Lower Mainland, it's $4,000 to rent a condo down there. Mm-hmm. Up here, I know it's a different way of approaching. I think on affordability, for me, the biggest thing is there's no affordability crisis at a high level for everybody if we can have jobs, if we can have a strong economy, if people have the opportunities to go to work. There's always some people who will struggle in different avenues, which is where government steps in to support. I do know, for instance, people who are struggling with disabilities right now, they haven't had an increase in years to help them for their housing. And I hear from a lot of them that, when I get $1,000 a month to live off of and my rent's $1,200, how do I survive?
Yeah.
So it depends. I don't want to shortchange people who are struggling out there, mm-hmm. but I think I go back to, the best time our region had financially when I was on the government side, because all the industries were booming, businesses were thriving, people had the opportunities for jobs. The joke back then was anybody with a heartbeat could get work because we were just struggling to find people up here, and they were good paying jobs. It was a different discussion back then around affordability and especially housing, mm-hmm. Because of that. I guess the other thing I could definitely say, one way to help with the affordability for housing is to build more housing. Mm-hmm. Because right now there's been a real pullback from developers, from industry, because they're concerned. Build a bunch of houses or rental units and then the industry slows down, which we're seeing, mm-hmm. and they don't want to be stranded either. So they kind of go together in a way. If you have a strong economy in the region, you'll have people investing in housing, you'll have more housing units, the prices can stabilize, and mm-hmm. it opens the door for a lot more people to get into either rental housing or even into housing to purchase.
Mhm. Wonderful. And another very interesting and tricky question, but what's your stance on education and the current curriculum that we have up here in the north?
That's a good one. And I love the fact that I didn't know any of these questions in advance. So it makes us really have to be honest and think about this. The education for me, because I'm a former education minister,
Yep.
and so I definitely saw the differences in the education quality around the province and the access to different educational components. By that I mean, if you're in some of the urban centers, the different options they have for class training curriculum is immense. We struggle up here just on the K-12 to get enough teachers right now. In fact, we have one of the biggest issues, I'd say, in our education system in the Peace region is what's called teachers with LOPs.
Yes.
It's called letters of permission,
Yes.
right? Because we haven't been able to recruit enough, and I say this respectfully, trained teachers to work in the classroom. And we need to do that. Thankfully, in a way, we have people working on LOPs, because if it wasn't that, we'd have kids in a classroom with no adult teaching them. But when it comes to the school system as a whole, I think we're lucky to have that rural education that we have, but we do have those struggles, whether it's teachers with LOP or access to some of the different course options that we don't have in other areas. That's always been something that I've heard from people. I know our duly elected school boards, of course, make the determination based on provincial funding. And that's where rural British Columbia also sometimes has a bit of a challenge, because the provincial funding model is per student funding.
Yeah.
So if you don't have as many kids, the school district doesn't get as much money, and they have to figure out how to stretch that out for the best education possible. I think that needs to be looked at as well.
Okay, that's a good way to put it. And kind of combining the last two questions, what is your plan for investment and in and towards infrastructure in the region?
Oh, what's my plan? I mean, there's a list a mile long of deficiencies. Let me put it this way. Up until 2016, when I was in the government side, we used to spend $40, $50, $100 million a year on infrastructure in the region, just in transportation alone.
Wow.
So that was working on our back road, gravel roads to help our agricultural sector in a lot of those areas. 4-laning on the Alaska Highway, perfect example. Just driving up here for this interview, I'm looking at all of the places that were either passing lanes, infrastructure improvements, 4-laning that was all done between 2010 to 2016 mostly, when I was on the government side. 2017 on, we have not had anything really done that wasn't already pre-approved. Like there's a few things that finished off or started, but that was because it started under us when we were in government. But there's huge deficits now because of that. And so that needs to be addressed. The most important one that we hear obviously is the Taylor Bridge. That needs to be replaced. I don't think anybody would argue with us on that. It's been limped along for quite a few years, and every time the engineers look at it, they say, we think we can get another 10 years out of it. The problem is what I've learned, just one of the roadways in Dawson Creek that I wanted to, it's called Snake Pit Road, and I worked really hard to get that changed to a straight road. Still called Snake Pit Road, ironically, even though it's straight. But that took years of pushing and fighting to get all the engineering, the environmental work done. So we need to start yesterday on the work for the Taylor Bridge replacement. And so I know myself, I'm sure Dan Davies, that's probably one of the things right front and center for us.
And certainly, especially if an engineer says you can get 10 years out of it, that doesn't matter if it takes 8 years for the environment and all the approval and for them to go, yes, you can do it. Now you've got to race and get 2 years of construction done.
Yeah.
If it's quick.
That's right. And we've seen the cost overruns around the province right now with the NDP government. They don't know how to manage projects. Heck, they have a hard time starting projects to begin with. And if they have started, they don't know how to manage them. There's no fiscal responsibility right now within the NDP government. That needs to be changed immediately. I can't support any of the stuff that they're doing like that, because not only the cost overruns, but again, it's just what a waste of taxpayers' dollars when it's not being managed properly, when it's not costed out properly to begin with. That's our money that's being wasted. And there's, I think, huge opportunity to do way more projects if we actually manage the ones that we're trying to do better, to stretch that money further.
Wonderful. And I promise I
Okay.
saved the hardest one for last. And it's tweaked a little bit because, of course, you're now an independent.
Okay.
Are you willing to work across party lines or with other independents to best represent your constituents if you're elected?
That's an interesting one. Let me put it into context now. As an independent, as I said at the very beginning of this interview, it's actually opened the door in a lot of ways to be louder and to also represent holistically the opinions, views of the people that I represent. And I always used to try to fight for it, but I think most people I've talked to understand there's sometimes you don't get on the soapbox, because if the intention is to always ensure we don't have the NDP, well, we have to make sure we win the Lower Mainland as political parties. That thought process is a little different now. I have to let the other parties take care of that. But as an independent, working across party lines will be great. The discussion that's happening right now in the provincial media is this might be the first time, because we have independents running, the first time that the independents might have the balance of power, where the independents might be the ones that government's going to have to work with in order to get a vote across the line. Because it won't matter who gets into government. They're going to have to come to myself and Dan Davies, for instance, as independents to actually make that vote pass in a lot of ways. One of the interesting nuances now, the NDP changed the rules, and this could backfire on them. It only takes 2 people as independents elected to be in the legislature to form a party coalition, which of course Dan and I could do. And then every single bill we get to debate. Every single day in question period, we would get a question. Every single committee we could sit on. It would be the first time in history that the Peace Region would have that kind of impact on what happens in Victoria. So instead of us always having to beg Victoria for them working across party lines, they'd be coming to us. So I'm really excited about that opportunity. And sometimes be careful what you wish for. But I will always work with whoever's in government to make the best decisions for the region, I guess is the very last part of the quick answer to your question.
All right. Well, wonderful. Those were all the questions.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much as
Thank you.
well.